Welcome to the Five Phenomenon Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hayes, and coming up this week, Lani Gonzalez is back, and we're discussing Cary Grant and his film Father Goose from 1964. Lani recently reviewed Cary Grant, The Making of a Hollywood Legend by Mark Glancy for bookandfilm.com. And so we picked this movie as the one to talk about. It's a interesting follow-up to Charade. But first, this week, it's funny we picked Cary Grant to talk about this week, one of the prototypical ageless movie stars, someone who is easy to watch and think of better times. Lani and I both had pretty shitty weeks this week, and I apologize for being maddeningly coy about it, but I can't really talk about it. Neither is my story to tell why my week sucked and why Lani sucked. All I can say is that I've worked in film. I've been paid to do film work for a little over 10 years, and it's a short time, but I've encountered a lot of really talented people who deserve to tell stories in film, and the economics of it are rough, especially this year. And I'm guilty as much as anybody else as a film person of talking about film personalities, their work, their successes, and their failures like they're baseball card statistics, or we're little kids asking if certain comic book superheroes fight, who would win. And it's hard to remember that there's real ramifications when some of these talented, beautiful people, careers, and then lives don't go the way we all planned. I've worked with a lot of great people who are like storytelling geniuses. They could light up a room. Their laughter just made you want to keep going, even in the face of a shitty job or just very little hope and career prospects. We all loved film. We all talked film together. And when their careers don't go the way they want, and their lives don't go the way they want, there's real ramifications in it, and it's hard to picture sometimes. Again, I'm sorry for being so very coy and vague about it, but again, it's just not my story to tell. But to all the talented storytellers out there who don't always get to tell the stories they want and whose lives were changed by that, I hope somewhere, sometime you get to tell your stories and they give you and other people meaning. But onward to rosier subjects. I'm glad I was able to get a friend like Lani on to talk and have a laugh at the end of this really terrible week. So, Cary Grant and Father Goose. I kind of skimmed that new biography we talked about, the Cary Grant one. It's called A Brilliant Disguise by Scott Eyman. But
okay, so the other one.
yeah, this whole thing was spurned because you had written a review of a Mark Glancy one called The Making of a Hollywood Legend.
Yeah, and I mean, and I read the biography, and it made me want to watch some Cary Grant movies. And so I was like, well, if Shane and I are going to talk about a movie, maybe Cary Grant movie. And now I have context.
Yeah. Well, it was your article in the end when you mentioned Father Goose. I just never heard of it. I was misled.
Right.
You said in the article that it was his last starring vehicle, which is true, and I thought it was his last role. But I also just
Right.
knew nothing about this role. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you mentioned in the article, it's so off type for someone who is a human being in the 50s who is so much of a person as a brand, someone who doesn't
hmm
deviate in any way. This is a guy like it's a movie where Cary Grant untucks his shirt and doesn't shave.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that he said like, well, the appearance of this character is more like how I am in real life. Because, around his house, he doesn't shave. He's, wearing comfy clothes, whatever.
Okay.
And his hair was, naturally, I mean, he's older, his hair is naturally gray. It was the first time his gray hair was really allowed to be shown too.
He doesn't comb his hair until the end of the movie too. Like
Yeah.
it's got, it's untidied. He's in this weird hat and boxers combination for parts of it. How like has he done out of the movies where he was downplaying or not debonair that you can think
I
of?
mean, definitely he has, but kind of his best known roles are, not that. And he made a lot of movies before 1938, which was really his breakout year. And before that, he played all kinds of characters. And um, I mean, I don't think usually like slovenly people necessarily, like really unkempt, but definitely not like dashing leading men types. And then even when he was a big star, he made films where like thinking of like Pennies from Heaven or Room for One More, which are like domestic drama type films where he's like a dad and he and his wife live in a little apartment and that's it's more that's not the penthouse on Park Avenue, Cary Grant, but I mean of course he's still very handsome and they're movie stars.
Okay. Okay. And there's also the funny aspect of the movie where he's an American dealing with the British Navy, and I think you mentioned this earlier in the article. The one famous thing about Cary Grant. What is the accent again, precisely?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually when I was reading about the movie too, I realized that it's supposed to be the Australian Navy, which okay.
Oh, I what?
Yeah, I mean it makes sense when you think geographically they're in the South Pacific and Australia. Do we need to like say what we're talking about more about the
we're,
movie here?
yeah. Father Goose from 1964. Cary Grant's second to last film. Uh, I haven't been good about doing recaps of plot. Could you do this? I don't know
Yeah,
where
sure.
to
Yeah.
start on it. Okay.
Yeah, no, sure. So Cary Grant plays an American, as you said, who's sort of a scruffy loner. He's got a boat and he's just kind of hanging out in the South Pacific, but it's during World War II, so not really a great time to be doing that. But he wants to run away from life, is what you kind of learn, and he's a drunk. And
That was the most
yeah,
fascinating thing you mentioned in the article, just his drinking, because in the movie it plays out like Popeye and his spinach,
right,
or to like the critic used to have a gag where Jay Sherman's dad they parodied Popeye where he had gin as
right,
his
right. Yeah, yeah,
spinach.
yeah.
It was like that where Cary Grant just needs some whiskey.
Some whiskey. And so he gets recruited by the Australian Navy, an old acquaintance of his who's played by Trevor Howard, who is British. So again, why would you think it was Australia?
Yeah, that's what threw me off.
Yeah.
I was thrown off because I recognize him mainly from The Third Man. I know he's been in a bunch of David Lean movies, but Third
Hmm.
Man was the main place I know him from.
Yeah, yeah, great classic British actor who Cary Grant was actually really excited to work with because he'd seen him in a Carol Reed movie, and so he kind of recruited him to play the commander who presses Walter into service as a spotter. And so he's basically going to put him on one of these remote islands out in the South Pacific and give him a radio, like in a shack, and give him supplies. And he should live there and then just radio in if he sees any Japanese planes. And to make sure that he goes through with it, they basically shipwreck him there by making a big hole in his boat so that he can't leave the island.
But this movie is directed by Ralph Nelson, who's got a funny, interesting background. But for the most part, we'll go into it in a bit. But mainly, he
Yeah.
was a TV guy, but he'd also in the '60s got a name. Lilies in the Field and Charlie are two big movies he did in the '60s, and he was known for getting good performances out of people. But he also
Yeah.
has this coming from TV. I couldn't get a beat on whether this felt like a TV-ish movie or not. Like
Hmm.
the flip frames, that device where you switch a device and like the frame
Hmm.
like turns on its on a center axis or something. But at the same time, the movie seemed like it was mostly location shot. But when that crash happens, not the best covered sequence. Like it was just like I think they cut away to someone looking like impish and Cary Grant like shaking his fist or something.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I guess kind of, yeah, those sort of what did you call it? Like when it flips, it's kind of like a Gilligan's Island like
Gilligan's
TV
Island.
thing.
There's
Yeah.
yeah. There's a scene later in the movie too where a child falls from a tree and you're like you don't see the fall, you just see that the child is suddenly
Getting
in Cary
taught.
Grant's
Yeah.
arms. Yeah.
Well, so let's get to the child. And
Okay.
there's
Okay.
actually 7 children because pretty soon after Walter is sent to the island, he is asked to take his small dinghy boat over to a neighboring island to pick up the radio operator who is there because the island is being invaded. And so he goes over there, but when he gets there, he does not find that person because the Radio Shack has already been bombed. But he does find a woman and 7 schoolgirls who are stranded there. And
I definitely, I had to double check. Sound of Music is 65, but I definitely I don't know if it was a thing from the mid 60s with kids, or a Disney thing, but there was a Von Trapp vibe to the children.
just because there were a lot of them and
I
they had
think.
matching outfits at the beginning. And then they have a funny costume change halfway through.
Sure. Thanks for listing those, Lonnie. I mean, like, I think it was a thing later added to the original screenplay too, which we'll go into Peter
Oh,
Stone too later. But
yeah. Well, let me just I mean, this is just the setup, and then
sure,
so
sure, sure. Right.
he takes the woman who is Leslie Caron and the girls back to his island, and you know they radio in, and Trevor Howard says, "Well, we can't get anyone over there, so you're gonna have to wait, and it's gonna be a few weeks. Like they don't know when they can actually come and rescue the kids." Uh, because the Japanese Navy is in the area. So then it's just, okay, how are they going to get along? And it's, the whole thing of the crusty old loner alcoholic and
Cary
the more,
Grant as the crusty
yes.
alcoholic. It's
And then the prim, woman and trying to, keep a handle on these kids and make sure they're protected and deal with him and, hijinks ensue until the end when they're able to leave the island, but not before a wedding.
very succinctly done. Very, very. I mean, Leslie Caron is someone I am wholly unfamiliar with. When I was reading up on this, I thought of Warren Beatty was dating her at the time and was coming to
Yes.
Jamaica, and the press was going on. But
Yes.
I still have not seen American in Paris. It's one of those movies I kind of want to hold
Oh,
out for the big
really?
screen on.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
I want to see it on the big screen.
Oh,
So
well, I don't know when that's going to happen, Shane, but you should see it. It's a movie that I really like. It's definitely in kind of my top faves.
okay.
Um, and that was her first movie, so I wouldn't say that she was a wonderful actress in that movie, but she certainly has a lovely screen presence, and was a dancer and dances in that movie, and is really fun in that role.
One of the reasons I thought this would be a cool movie to watch is the writer Peter Stone was following
Yeah.
had been mainly Cary Grant's writer since Charade, and years ago, you and I and our friend Danielle,
Yeah.
whenever I used to be able to work, whenever the I was still a projectionist and we'd switched over to digital, we had ways of connecting Blu-ray players to the big screen, so we would watch Blu-rays on the big screen. We all watched Charade together, and I don't remember,
Yes.
was that wholly your pick or was it your and Danielle's pick?
I think it was my choice, because I think I had just recently bought it on DVD. I'd seen it before, but I had just bought it. And so I was like, it was one of my favorite movies. Let's watch that. And
Mm,
yeah, that's really one of my favorite movie going experiences when I think about it, because it was so cool just to have the theater to ourselves.
yeah, it was cool. I watched how was it Torn Curtain or Topaz, I think, with my friend Ted in
Mm,
the theater, another movie around that era. Although I watched a ton of movies, including some really
yeah.
terrible mid-aughts indies that don't deserve to be seen on the big screen. Where does Cary Grant fall? Is he your favorite actor, or is he your favorite actor of this era, or where does he fall on if we're going to list this?
Yeah, he is one of my all-time favorite actors, certainly of the classic era, as you would call it. And I mean, him and not Jim, Gene Kelly are probably my two favorites.
Gene Kelly's
Um,
a great football player.
yeah, right. Jim Kelly. No, Jim Kelly is like he played for the Bills when I was a Cowboys fan, so right?
I made that gambit, and turns out you knew more than I did about it.
Yeah.
So,
Anyways, yeah, Gene Kelly and Cary Grant, definitely my two favorite, actors of that time. And it was really funny for me watching Father Goose to talk about Cary Grant, just because when I think of Cary Grant, I tend to think of him in black and white, because
okay,
the
that makes sense.
movies from the 40s are more of my favorite Cary Grant movies.
Hmm.
And then in the 50s and 60s, he made fewer movies and they were in color. And so, yeah, but I tend to think of him in sort of like The Awful Truth or The Philadelphia Story, His
Hmm.
Girl Friday, that sort of look.
Yeah, I mean, as color came in, he was always known as this ageless actor, and but you mentioned 19, was it 38? You said that is when he had his
Yeah, that was his real breakout year.
I mean, I knew him like he done like I guess his career started May or really he got into prominence through those two Mae West movies he did where they starred together.
I mean, uh, yeah, I feel like that's probably something that people think now, like looking back, those are more notable because they are like Mae West movies. But at the time, it didn't really, do a lot for his career. I mean, except
Mm,
that he, just kind of kept working.
hmm. There's a
Yeah.
the streak.
Hmm.
It starts in 37 with Awful Truth, but when I was going through his going through his filmography, there's just this like he's also known as consistently someone who picked commercial hits. Like Stanley Kramer had this comment that
Hmm.
supposedly he what the phrase is something I didn't get the exact quote, but it's something like diffidence that conceals a cold commercial calculation. But that being said, not as a negative, from 37, I'm just going to read the titles: The Awful Truth, Bringing Up Baby, Holiday, Gunga Din, Only Angels Have Wings, In Name Only, which I haven't seen or I'm familiar with, His Girl Friday, I in there's two, and then Philadelphia Story, and then Penny Serenade, Suspicion, Arsenic and Old Lace, Talk of the Town. Um, that gets him to 1942, and I've skipped like three
Yeah.
movies. Like it's just classic after classic. Like it's like the Scott Eyman tries to compare him to right now the closest comparison he got is George Clooney, although George Clooney hasn't done much in these years. But it's just
Yeah.
I can that sigh. I got a
No,
feeling
I
that's
was just thinking about it. Like, yeah, definitely. If for as a shorthand, sort of like I think more in the appearance, reputation kind of thing, that he can do comedy and drama, but you picture him in a tux, you know?
right.
And that George Clooney is definitely the main one for the modern moviegoer.
Okay. Um. So when did you first see this movie? Do you remember?
I'm not exactly sure. Probably like when I was a teenager, I think. I haven't watched it in a really long time. But I think it was just on like Turner Classic Movies or AMC when they still played a lot of classic movies. And my dad saw that it was coming on, and he said, "Oh, this is a really good movie," and so we watched
Hmm.
it. And yeah.
This is my first time seeing it. Yeah, it's uh, like, I mean, the Hitchcock movies in the 50s are the other part of the color thing that I know most of them through, but like Charade, like I don't love it as much as you do, but I do. It's such a witty movie, and this movie kind of carries on that level of cleverness, and it's written by Frank Tarloff, who I guess wrote the original draft, and Peter Stone took over for him, but
Yeah,
it
there
won an
was
Oscar
actually,
for
yeah, there
best
was actually
screenplay.
a script that existed. It was called A Place of Dragons, and it was, I don't know why, and it was given to Cary Grant because he was looking for a new project. Because at this point, he was also producing a lot of his films, and that's why, I mean, you said he tended to choose a lot of commercial things. That's part of why, because he wanted to make money as the
Hmm.
producer.
I was
And
seeing that he had a stipulation that he had to own his own negatives as a producer on any movie he chose. Because like there was
oh,
a point where Hitchcock was thinking about maybe seeing if he was interested in something like Torn Curtain, and
uh-huh.
one of the reasons he was thought against it was the negative,
Hmm.
like which I mean his biggest payday was supposedly North by Northwest.
I don't know exactly, but that was definitely his biggest commercial hit.
Mm,
Certainly up to that point. Um, yeah, and so this script was given to him because he was looking for a new project, and he liked it, but he wanted Peter Stone to rewrite it. So he had worked with Peter Stone, uh, just recently on Charade, which had come out maybe like a year before. Well, Charade is like a 1963 movie, and Father Goose is a 64 movie. and
okay.
and so he brought in Peter Stone and worked with him really closely um, on the script and making sure that the character of Walter was the character that Carrie was envisioning, which was someone who was gruff and unpleasant and very different from his debonair image.
Do
um,
you do you have
yeah.
any reason why he was so interested in like I saw some mentions that he was wanting to follow the Spencer Tracy or Clark Gable template of aging, which I mean Clooney maybe kind of is doing right now, but the greatest later model of that was Paul Newman, someone,
Mm.
but at the same time, like he's solid in this movie. Like he's gonna age, but he's like, oh, one more movie and I'm done. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't like an experiment that failed. This was pretty charming. I mean, and still interesting too.
Yeah, I think at the time he was kind of had in mind that, he might retire soon. Um, but I don't know exactly why he may have wanted to do this sort of change of pace, but just from reading in the biography, um, he liked that this would be a bit of a challenge, an acting challenge, and just something that would break away from that image. And he embraced that. He had been offered the role of Professor Higgins in My Fair Lady, which
Hmm.
I think is funny. And he turned that down, and then and then chose to do Father Goose instead.
Part of me wants to wish I had a comprehensive list of the movies he's turned down because
Oh, I mean, like almost anything. Yeah.
well, even just at this time, I was
Yeah.
reading into it, like, and just um, Eyman didn't go too far into this, but he mentioned that he was up for the role of the Edward G. Robinson role in Cincinnati Kid, and he
Hmm.
mentions Norman Jewison, but Cincinnati Kid is a movie where Norman Jewison came on like 2 weeks in or something like that, but the movie was cast and all the pre-production was done by Sam Peckinpah. So can you
Huh.
imagine Cary Grant in a Sam Peckinpah movie?
Yeah, I don't know how that may have been like he was considered for it, but I don't think he would actually want to do it. Because what year did that come out even?
Well, it was still kind of
Mm.
peck and paw on
Yeah,
his pre-Wild Brunch, so like I mean, Ride the High Country, I think did well at Cannes or something. Like he was still considered
yeah,
an artsy Western director, but he could have
yeah,
also equally has been considered a studio guy at that
yeah.
point. I mean, the other famous person that kept trying to get Cary Grant and kept getting turned down was Billy Wilder, but he got offered
Mm.
Sabrina and Love in the Afternoon. And famously, I couldn't find anything in the bio. I'm surprised. I don't know why someone hasn't dived into this. Maybe your book does this, but does anyone got a real honest impression of how he felt about Some Like It Hot and the Tony Curtis performance? Because they always say that he just like wrote a
Oh.
telegram to Billy Wilder or Tony Curtis, like, "Thanks for impersonating me," but really, like, I've had viewings of Some Like It Hot where I'm like, Billy Wilder really, this isn't just a joke. He really, really wanted Cary Grant for this movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I think also part of it was that Tony Curtis said that he was a big fan of Cary Grant.
He
And
wasn't a.
no, Tony Curtis was a big fan of
Oh,
Cary Grant, and so that's why he wanted to do that voice,
okay.
which is such a, it's, yeah, it is totally a trademark of Cary Grant, is that, people talk about his weird accent, like, where is that from? What is it? And it's just this weird amalgam of all the
Yeah.
places he's from. And so I just want to say that's part of why he turned down My Fair Lady. I mean, one of the things he said was, you know, but I speak like Eliza does at the beginning of the movie. Like, I can't be Higgins.
uh, this might be a transition point. I wanted to, like, do we want to go over a little bit of his childhood and the vaudeville days? Like, I mean, I don't know too much about it.
Well, yeah, I think it's worth mentioning, and that's one of the things that I liked about reading this biography was it kind of you hear things like, oh yeah, he started out in like, doing vaudeville and stuff, and he was in like a traveling theater troupe and whatever. But you can see how it really actually did influence the his later career, and I think part of why he was so successful because he got all this training starting as a teenager and for a long time, a solid, through his 20s, where he learned acrobatics, he was doing comedy, and you see when he makes a movie like, the screwball comedies, like The Awful Truth, or he's got that comic timing that, has just been honed for years. So
There's definitely the template, even in the dramas, of like someone who's constantly playing drama as comedy. Like or even just like a handsome leading man who's playing everything as comedy.
And one thing that I also started noticing too was the physicality. And, I had to, reading it reminded me like, oh yeah, I mean, he was trained to do like tumbling and like
Mm.
stunts, for the stage, like walking on stilts and all kinds of, crazy stuff like that. And so then when he's in a movie, he does do physical comedy a lot. And but he's also very athletic, and it's something that you kind of maybe don't uh you maybe take for granted, but
Mm.
you don't notice. But then you see something like the famous North by Northwest crop duster scene, and he's running and he's diving in the dirt, and he knows exactly how to dive in the dirt so that his face is seen and everything. And
But
I think that's someone who has a lot of control over their physical instrument, which you see a lot with dancers too.
that is a very interesting point because when I was looking at his TCM clips, there were just so many more pratfalls that I was thinking, or just like the level of
Yes.
slaps he would take too. Like, but
And like the pratfalls are really great pratfall because he knows exactly how to fall, how to kick his leg up, to like emphasize it, and he's done it so much that he knows how to do it perfectly.
right. You mentioned the North by Northwest crop duster scene. I have always wanted to point this out. So, in that point in the movie, they're driving between, he's on a bus from Indianapolis to Chicago. And there's a shot at one point where you see he's on Highway 41. Now, Highway 41 goes through Evansville. And I have taken the trip up to Chicago many, many times. We normally don't go the 41 route because once you get north of central Indiana, 41 gets very circuitous. But I have taken more than one trip where I was like, it's obviously just a arbitrary cornfield. That's not doesn't have corn into empty one. That's the crop duster is going to be flying through. But in theory, I keep want to find the location. It's not a real location, but I want to find it. And I found the metaphorical one of it. I've driven that, but yeah, if I want to find the real version, I have to go to like Kansas or a studio in LA at some point. But
Yeah, I'm not even sure if you could actually go there.
yeah. So, what else do you remember was really taking you with the biography you read?
Well, and it was just interesting to learn, how much, Cary Grant really did want to control his career. He's one of those people who started in the studio system and was sort of ill-served by it. He was just getting put into roles that, weren't really getting him anywhere. And then in that 1938 and afterwards, he started taking more control of being able to pick what he was doing and also taking on more of a producing role and really making sure that he was getting the star treatment that would keep him a star
Mm.
and then be able to keep making these successful movies. And
One quote I found was that one of the reasons he was turning down Billy Wilder, but also dictates his choices. He said Eyman said that after 1940, Cary Grant didn't want to play any part where life had beaten him down or his character down.
mm, well, then he did Father Goose.
Yeah, but I mean, like it's a positive, and yeah. Actually, you know what? That completely contradicts Father Goose. Um,
Because this character is someone who has been sort of beaten down by life. You learn later that he was a history professor and he, you know, uh,
neckties.
so you find out that, yeah, he didn't want to wear, well, yeah, it was an interesting like message. Like, he looked around and saw everyone was the same and everyone's wearing neckties and he just didn't want to be part of, that scene, man. He wanted to, he wanted to get out of there.
I my biggest laugh in this movie was I don't know if I'm spoiling a laugh, but was the whenever Leslie Caron gets on the radio for the first time
Hmm.
and what she requests. It just that and everyone's reaction to that maybe the 90s. It's or
Right.
eight to 90s. Um,
Yes.
there was the gag, the whole sequence at the end with the snake fight. I remember kept thinking, man, I want it to be funnier, but like I feel like
Yeah.
if I was watching at the Paramount in Austin, it would have been killing the crowd. But like watching by myself, I was like, all right, I get what they're going for.
Yeah, it's a weird, it's kind of a weird sequence. So Leslie Caron is in a boat with some of the girls and they think that she gets bitten in the leg by a snake. It's actually she gets cut by a tree branch or something. And then, but they think she's been bitten by a poisonous snake, so they think she's dying. And Cary Grant goes in there and tries to suck the venom out of her ankle. And he gets her drunk on his whiskey so that, she can take the pain and also, to take her mind off it. And, of course, she's fine. She's just cut by a tree branch and but she gets drunk and starts spilling all her secrets and they connect in that moment but it got kind of crazy. Like at one point she's like telling him asking him how did my blood taste.
Yeah, was it salty? And you think she got insulted that he didn't like the taste of it?
Yeah, he
Some
said like,
real
oh,
Arnie
it was
Hammer stuff
really
there, right?
good blood. Yeah, it was weird because she was like saying how she liked it when he sucked on her leg and I'm like, whoa, okay,
Yeah.
lady. Did she like
It,
how my blood tasted?
I simultaneously just saw the meet cute, not even meet cute, but like how the script was getting them together. And there's something about when I see this in Cary Grant in black and white, like I'm just fine with. And the more modern it gets, the less I was like, okay, I see what they're doing. I don't know, like I don't know if it's
Yeah, I mean,
him aiding her with it or not.
I admit that the fact that the two of them get together seems a little odd. Like I could, like whatever, they're in a stressful time, and so it brings them closer together. But and they're like, the best looking people they've probably met in a while. That helps.
And he makes sure to get her a wedding ring too.
Yes, yes. I saw some. I guess maybe it was in the biography. They compared it to The African Queen, but as
Yes,
a
I saw that
lighter
too.
family type film. With the kids and everything, which it definitely, yeah, it definitely has a lot of parallels with that. With two people coming together, the crusty uh loner and the prim woman, and at the end they get married.
And in the middle of the
In the middle
jungle
of war.
or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Did Houston ever have anything to try to get Cary Grant for anything? Oh, right, because he tried to get him for the Man Who Would Be King at one point. He wanted Gable to
Oh,
take over after
but he had
Bogart died.
retired by that
No,
point.
this was in the late 60s or early
Oh,
60s. He
really?
tried at one point too, because he
Oh,
wrote it for Gable and Bogart in like the
oh.
early 50s, and it was like 20 years before he got it made. I
Hmm.
asked you a question. I thought the answer
You
for.
already knew. Well, did you think that there were like funny things in the movie?
Yeah. Oh no. I really
Yeah,
like this
yeah.
movie. I did like this movie, and and when I was trying to figure out the Ralph Nelson stuff, like I thought he was a pretty solid filmmaker. He has this. He was the director on the first season of Twilight Zone. He directed
Hmm.
Rita Hayworth's last film, Once a Thief. He was not actually the original director of this movie. It was going to be a guy named
Right.
David Miller. Um, I mean, I haven't really seen anything of his. He directed a movie with Kirk Douglas called Lonely or the Brave. That's supposedly one of his best,
Mm.
but he got fired
Hmm.
like, was it like 2 weeks or something before they shot?
Well, he didn't like Cary Grant being so controlling over all aspects of the movie, which he, as a producer, he was also had a lot of control of choosing the cast. He chose the composer, he chose the writer, and yeah,
I
Miller
saw that
resigned. It
he
says,
originally wanted, Cary Grant originally wanted Audrey Hepburn for this too.
yeah, well, they had just worked together in Charade, and I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and she fits because the character is like French, or
Mm.
her name is Catherine Frenot, so and Audrey Hepburn, is from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
but Audrey Hepburn was making My Fair Lady, so which Cary Grant turned down. So
Mm-hmm.
can you imagine? So then his next, I don't know if it was his next choice, but he found Leslie Caron.
He'd
Um,
seen her in the L-shaped room, I think, was
yeah,
why he chose her.
yeah.
That's what I saw.
And he also chose Trevor Howard, and he also was involved in the casting of all the kids too. And
Really?
yeah, and they auditioned them and selected them. He was part of that. The seven young actresses, and they wanted to choose kids that had little or no prior acting experience.
Hmm. Yeah, am I onto something with the Von Trapp thing? Was there like a Disney TV thing where kids were suddenly in vogue, or am I just like reverse engineering that?
I don't know. I think that definitely in the 60s there are a lot of movies where it's like like adults and then like that whole bunch of kids, because there's also Yours, Mine, and Ours, which is a movie about Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball, and they each have like a bunch of kids, and they get married, and so then they have a big family.
Is that what
Um,
Cheaper by the
che-
Dozen was remaking?
no, no, Cheaper by the Dozen was a earlier movie about a family that just had a dozen kids,
Okay.
and that was William Powell and Myrna Loy, and that's actually a good
Oh,
movie too. And it's just they have a lot of kids and they're efficiency experts, is what that movie is. Um, and then so yeah, the Steve Martin remake in the '90s was remaking Cheaper by the Dozen, but there was a remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, with Dennis Quaid and Rene Russo, I think,
that's
also in the
what I'm
'90s.
thinking of.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that one.
But yeah, so there definitely was a thing with like a movie with a bunch of kids. I think there was a Doris Day movie called With Six You Get Egg Roll. Um, and then there was the Brady Bunch at the end of the 60s. And so
Okay.
it was a thing. I think you're onto something.
Okay. Okay. I think this is earlier, but it also had a Swiss Family Robinson Disney vibe to
Yes.
it. But
Yeah.
well, when you originally we were going back and forth about doing this, I was the one that was like, I'm interested in seeing
Yeah.
Father Goose just because I hadn't seen it, and you made it sound interesting. But you had suggested other movies of Cary Grant's you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love talking about any Cary Grant movie. It's fine. I've seen a lot of them, not all, but I've definitely even seen bad ones. But I suggested watching a couple of the Hitchcock collaborations because he made 4 movies with Alfred Hitchcock, and he was one of Hitchcock's favorite actors to work with, and they were friends and they worked well together. And Suspicion, the first movie they made together, is one of my favorites as well, especially a favorite Cary Grant movie. And then there's also Notorious, To Catch a Thief, and North by Northwest.
I have a big soft spot for the '50s ones, which is why I'm
Yeah.
unfamiliar with the '40s ones. It was funny that Torn Curtain story I was telling earlier.
Hmm.
It was at a Dodgers game. Can you imagine Hitchcock and Cary Grant at a Dodgers
At a
game?
Dodgers game, I know.
Just both of them just dressed to the prim and sweating.
Yeah.
Um, I haven't seen Notorious or Suspicion in a long time, but
Really? Oh, you've seen them before, but not in a while.
just it's also Notorious in particular is like Cary Grant straight up dramatic acting more. Would you agree?
Yeah, and a bit of yeah. I mean, yeah, it's not a comedy. I think he always tends to be able to have a sparkle in his eye kind of thing. Um, and there's definitely romance to it. So he has some lighter moments with Ingrid Bergman, but yeah, that's more drama.
Okay.
Yeah. To Catch a Thief is definitely more on the comedy side. It's very
Yeah,
champagne sparkling, flirting with Grace Kelly, who was his favorite leading lady.
I had
Also.
heard that his favorite person to kiss. I have this every once in a while. I like to rank Hitchcock's '50s movies just because it's such a bounty of riches, and then like to make a
Mm,
dark horse one come out. Like sometimes I'd like to say
mm.
Strangers on a Train deserves to be high up, and then sometimes things like To Catch a Thief is like it's so well made, but it gets lost in this embarrassment of riches of Hitchcock movies in the '50s.
Yeah, I mean, To Catch a Thief, I think because maybe its plot isn't as memorable. I think maybe people don't really remember what the actual plot of that one is. You just kind of remember like the scenery and the stars more.
Okay.
That's my guess. I mean, I like it, but that's my guess why maybe people don't talk about it as much as like Strangers on the Train gets talked about because, I think people are more intrigued by the central plot of that and the
Yeah, and I love to make this the a cynic argument that the merry-go-round sequence is better than the shower sequence in Psycho, but I've heard others make that. I did not originate that. I stole that from somebody else. Um, but what about Notorious? Like, what exactly do you love about that?
Well, that is one that I haven't seen in a while. I can't say that totally, it's
Okay.
not one of my favorites, but I did like it when I saw it. And I do really like Claude Rains as well, who plays the main villain in that movie. I say villain. He is a Nazi, so I should be clear. He is a villain, but he finds a way to be sympathetic, I think, in that role. Claude Rains is great in that movie, and that's just kind of a fun thriller. And Suspicion, I think, because I think it's very, I don't know. I guess I just kind of am drawn in by the idea of, in that story, Cary Grant marries Joan Fontaine, who is seen as the sort of mousy spinster of the town, which is kind of hilarious to me always because Joan Fontaine is gorgeous. And she's always like, I can't, feeling like she's not good enough, and then wondering why he chose her. And he's kind of a loser in a way. He spends her money, and then she starts to suspect that he's trying to kill her in order to get her money, when actually there's he's just like doing things that seem suspicious, but it creates a lot of tension. And, there's scenes where she thinks like, oh, he's coming to poison me or something. And so Hitchcock is so great at creating that suspense. But I
Yeah.
think I like their relationship. And I like that Cary Grant is playing, in some ways, he's playing very much the charming Cary Grant role, but he's also got this darker side to him because you also have to believe credibly that he could be trying to kill his wife.
I mean, it's said that Cary Grant was Hitchcock's prototypical leading man. He was his favorite leading man, and like, there's a vibe where it's just like he checks a few number of boxes where he's charming, and women would love to seduce Cary Grant. I mean, the key to his appeal seemed to be that he always pretended to be an ordinary person and let the woman seduce him. Seems to be part of his strategy in some of these movies. Um, One of the movies when going through the Cary Grant list that I have never seen is, I don't know, is it the main Stanley Donen precursor to Charade with Cary Grant, Indiscreet? Have you seen that?
I have seen Indiscreet.
Is it good?
I haven't seen it in a while. At the time I watched it, it wasn't one of my favorites.
Okay.
More like into boring. No.
Way to pun, Lonnie. I see what you did there.
No, I think that's worth a rewatch. I mean, he and Ingrid Bergman were also they were notorious together. That might be the only
That
two
was
films
that
they
was the
made
other thought.
together.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like just 10 years later. But I mean, it's Stanley Donen. It's got to be somewhat witty, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think maybe it's one of those movies that's very like adult sophisticated kind of thing about like, and it's also like the 50s, and it's like the weird like 50s morals about adults not being able to like sleep together if they're not married thing, which like when you're
Oh.
watching it like now and you think like these people are like 40 years old, why can't they just like go home together, like let's just be real. So sometimes those like what another Cary Grant movie that has a similar thing is that Touch of Mink, which is a Doris Day movie, and of course Doris Day was the perpetual virgin, even though she was a grown woman. And in that movie, he like picks her up. He's like a rich guy, and she's not, and she gets kind of swept up by him. But he like takes her somewhere, and there's this implication like, are they gonna sleep together? But that would be so wrong. Like she can't go with him, and it's just like, come on, get over it.
I do want to talk positives on here most of the time, but I was curious. You mentioned some Cary Grant movies that weren't good.
Well, I mean, like I was just talking about that Touch of Mink. I think you can watch it and enjoy parts of it, but a lot of it is just, I don't think, plays very well, especially now when you're
Well,
watching like adults who are like scared to be, you know, kiss each other.
what were some other titles that
I
had
mean,
of Cary Grants that don't really work?
I mean, he made some weird ones. One that always springs to mind is this one that's called like, I want to look up, make sure I find the right title. It's like the so and so's of Virginia, where he's playing like a revolutionary era American in Virginia, and it's just like, you are not the person for this movie. You are not right for this. He made a lot of movies before, like in the 30s, that are just like, who and what is this? You just don't even want to bother watching it. He was in this adaptation of Alice in Wonderland from 1933,
Really?
which had a lot of like stars from the studio at that time. It was a Paramount movie. Like Gary Cooper is in it, and they play like random characters. Like, what is he? He's the Mock Turtle, and that movie is not good.
That sounds I want to say weird, but honestly, now you're just making me want to watch. Like maybe
I mean,
watch
it's
just like
not really
a
worth
clip on
it.
YouTube. I don't want to spend the entire feature length watching it, but I want to
Yeah,
see it.
yeah. And some of his movies that I even like watching, there are also kind of cringy stuff, like The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, which won a screenwriting award.
I love your distinguishment with A there. Yeah.
It's a movie where he's, again, an adult professor who has to pretend to be interested in dating a teenage girl played by Shirley Temple, so that her
Oh my
feelings don't get
gosh.
hurt. And it's like, this is wrong. Like, this is an inappropriate relationship. If she gets her feelings hurt, it's fine because he shouldn't be dating her.
There was a scene in Father Goose with him with
Yes.
what was funny was I was reading that she's playing the older girl in there, um,
Mm-hmm.
and she really was like 10, younger than everyone else. She just happened to be grow tall for her
Mm.
age.
Yeah, and he like she gets infatuated with him briefly, and then he tries to play into it and it scares her off.
It's, I mean, it is really one of those moments where his instincts for crowd pleasing, like
Yeah.
I can't begrudge him for that. It works. He's just it's like it sometimes seems out of character, but it's funny to watch. One title I wanted to ask you about. I was curious about. I really only skimmed the biography. I didn't really read much of it, but I was really curious about his relationship with Clifford Odets. And one title I wanted to ask you about was None But the Lonely Heart. Have you seen that?
I don't think so. I don't think I've seen that movie.
Was Clifford Odets mentioned much in your biography?
I think he was. I mean, it definitely was. They talked about the movie, but I don't remember that being a big part of his life.
Okay, he's mentioned a few times they had a relationship, but one of the fascinating things I watched Cary Grant's acceptance speech for his Lifetime Achievement Oscar,
Mm-hmm.
and he made sure to thank the directors. He thanked Hitchcock, he thanked Howard Hawks. I want to say it was George Stevens was mentioned, Leo McCarey, George Cukor was mentioned, but then he started mentioning a bunch of the writers, and he mentioned Ben Hecht,
Mm-hmm.
who we talked about our last episode, and um, True Form. I'm misremembering a bunch of the writers, and he mentioned Peter Stone was one of the last ones, but the one he gave a descriptor for was he said the dear Clifford Odets, and I thought they'd had a personal relationship, and he was really broken up when Clifford Odets died.
I'm like looking at it right now about the in the book, and I mean, they made that movie together, and I think, okay, now seeing what the plot of the movie is, it definitely makes sense that Cary Grant would want to do it because it's about a working class Cockney person and they're in a family,
Mm.
and since that was Cary Grant's background, he definitely was interested in showing that.
Um, so when you first mentioned you were reading this book, do you remember the first thing I asked you about it?
No, what did you ask me?
I am very fascinated. I'm a big lover of the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind about psychedelics, and
Oh, right, right, yeah.
Cary Grant is mentioned quite a bit, not throughout the book, but at a key portion. And so I wanted to know about Cary Grant's LSD experiments.
Yeah, I mean, that is in the biography. I mean, it was obviously later into his life. And it was something that people were doing at the time before it became more of a widespread, like, recreational drug. It was something that people were doing in the, vein of like psychology or trying to get
Where
in.
hopefully it's getting where it's coming back now is more as as a actual like bridge between the talking cure and pharmaceuticals,
Yeah.
psychopharmaceuticals. So
Yeah. So he was using it for therapy. And I mean, he was into it. He thought that it really helped him.
was it?
Um,
It was like some Beverly Hills psychologist was prescribing it or having sessions, guided trips, basically.
Yeah, and he would kind of, he was using it to find, the inner demons and that kind of thing. And at the time, so this was like the late 50s, and at the time he was married to the actress Betsy Drake, and she tried it. And she was like, okay, yeah, it kind of helped me with something, but I'm not into it. I don't want to use it all the time. And, he was definitely more of a proselytizer about it
Mm.
and trying to get people to use it. I think he also tried later, when he was with Diane Cannon, his next wife, that he tried to get her to do it, and she just wasn't into it either. But he was like, it's made me a new man. I'm freed from my inhibitions. He was like telling everyone about it.
There was some press stuff I read where he sounded like a straight up hippie philosophizer, like a good 8 years before hippiedom kind of took over. Um, do you want to give any lip service to the whole how many marriages he had, trouble marriage stuff? Was that a part of the book? Like, I know you're not really interested in a lot of the salacious gossip stuff.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it definitely goes through. He had, let's see, like five wives. Um, and he was married to an actress, and his first wife was an actress. It lasted like a year, Virginia Sherrill. His second wife, it's interesting to me who he married because they're very, I don't know, kind of varying people, but he definitely had a type physically. His second wife was Barbara Hutton, who was an heiress and at the time one of the richest people in the world.
That one was the one that fascinated me. Yeah.
And I mean, still, even after reading the biography, I'm still kind of confused about why they were a couple because it just seemed like she was really kind of just interested in having parties and hanging out at the house and basically kind of superficial things. And he wasn't as into that. And he wanted to, have more of a home life and not parties. And she had a son from a previous marriage, and Cary Grant was a stepfather to the son and actually remained very close to him as a father figure, which I thought was interesting. And but he only had a child with Diane Cannon, who was his fourth wife, and that's when he chose to retire from acting to become a father and really be more of a full-time father.
That what his motivation was. I mean, I guess it was kids, but like it seems it was so committed because he still worked after that. He just retired from movies.
He retired from being in movies. Yeah, he did work and he went on and he would do like sort of like staged things where it was like an evening with Cary Grant and he would come out and talk about his movies and stuff. But it was always but he didn't do it too much because he wanted it to be like a special thing that people would still want to see him. And that's kind of that old, adage of, always leave them wanting more. And
Hmm.
I think that's part of what he wanted to do was kind of go out on top while he still was very popular and, at the top of his game and not, flame out. And
Okay.
he finally had a daughter. He was very interested in having a family, and he wanted to be committed to being with his kid. And he had seen how, being an actor, you have a weird schedule and you have to go a lot of different places, and he wanted to be available for his daughter.
Mm. Scott Eyman talks about the fact that he maintained that high level of commercial success and picking right roles and being, even if he was a template in these movies, he still was top of his game for 40 years, which is a hard period to sustain. So I guess that makes sense. The opening of Eamon's book is describes this scenario leading up to Cary Grant's death. So
Hmm.
skipping back just a little. The beginning, right before the pandemic, I mentioned this a few of the episodes at the time. I went to Iowa to canvass for the Andrew Yang campaign, and we were based out of Davenport, Iowa. And one of the
Hmm.
big campaign events we worked around was one of his small rallies was at a hotel downtown. And someone casually told me it's the Black Hawk Hotel, and someone casually told me he's like, "Oh, this is the hotel Cary Grant died in."
Wow.
Yeah, well, he technically didn't die in the hotel. He died at the
Right.
hospital, but
Right.
he was giving one of those nights with Cary Grant, and I guess he had a stroke, and that's where he
Yeah.
died.
Yeah. Yeah, and when he was doing those that touring around doing those performances, he was going to a lot of smaller town places. Like, I mean, Davenport, Iowa isn't, exactly the hub of the world.
Right.
And he was going back to places that he had visited when he was in his 20s and touring around the country with his um, theater troupe.
The book mentions that he had gone to Davenport for that. Yeah, in his
Yeah, so
20s.
they went to cities all over the country, and so he had really fond memories of going to all these towns in America and really getting to see, all the different parts of America. And so when he went on these tours, he wanted to go to places like that too, which I thought was interesting.
Mm.
Trying to almost kind of recapture sort of that sense of when he was young and kind of discovering things.
It's like an indie rock band in their
Yeah.
80s could be like, just like, we want to follow the tour we went back at that time.
Mhm.
Do you have any like hidden gem Cary Grant movies that you don't think are talked about enough?
Oh man, you're like springing questions on me here. I'm like, so, um, so I think a lot of people kind of know a lot of his films that are really good.
It
Like we've
happens when you're a
mentioned,
box office star, yeah.
yeah, we mentioned a few of them. Some that maybe we haven't mentioned. I mentioned The Awful Truth a few times. He made a couple other movies with Irene Dunn, who I really like as a leading lady, and the second movie they made together is called My Favorite Wife, from 1940, which is really funny screwball comedy.
I haven't
Um,
seen that.
yeah, it's a pretty funny movie. It's about basically they're married, then she gets like shipwrecked and is presumed dead, and he's about to get remarried, and then she shows up alive, and so it's a lot of slapstick with him being like, oh, there's my wife, and ooh, I've got my fiance over here.
So it's
And
not a screwball version of the end of Castaway.
no. I mean, maybe you could call it that. um I also like another comedy he made called I Was a Male War Bride.
Oh yeah, I'm overdue to see that. That's a big
Yeah,
Hawks movie, right?
yeah, it's directed by Howard Hawks. I don't think it's one that, comes up kind of on the top tier whenever you talk about Cary Grant or Howard Hawks, but it's a funny one where he's a French officer, which okay, and he during wartime he marries an American army officer played by Anne Sheridan, and so he has to go through all the processes that all the people that were foreign nationals who married American officers have to go through in order to get entry into the country after the war. And because he's the only man, it's mostly women who are married to GIs. It's all of that sort of like out of place comedy.
Hmm.
And then I'll just also mention another one, which is a movie that he made with his wife at the time, Betsy Drake, who is I think probably his most interesting wife of the of the five. I find her interesting. They were married the longest time. I think they were married about 11 years, so it's definitely his longest marriage. And she had a pretty interesting career of going into writing afterwards, but she was a stage actress and she was trying to make it in the movies, and so he agreed to be in this movie basically to boost her career. And it was called Every Girl Should Be Married. The whole premise, from the title down to what the action in the movie, is completely dated and like sexist. And I can't condone, the premise of the movie, but it is funny to watch them together, knowing that they were a couple, and it's if you can imagine their personas, like you said, Cary Grant is like George Clooney. It's like if George Clooney and Greta Gerwig were in a romantic comedy together almost. And he's playing like a pediatrician, and she's just kind of this young woman wants to get married. And so she just like relentlessly pursues him And then at one point, she tries to make him jealous by dating Francho Tone, this other classic era actor. And it's just kind of it's charming, but also the whole time you're thinking, well, this is just so dated.
One of the reasons I was interested and glad to have you on again is when I have people on and I question them what they want to do and what they want to talk about. This is a blind spot of mine. You're the only person who's mentioned actors. Everyone I have on wants to talk directors. If you want to talk writers, you're the only ones mentioned actors, and it's a real blind spot. It's just like whenever you sometimes hear people talk, and they can rattle off the cast list, the character name and the actor that played them. Like I don't know if it's just my brain is going more towards editing and camera angles and
Yeah.
just stuff like that. But I mean, personalities are clearly the reason we all got into this in the first place. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can appreciate all different facets, but I definitely tend to think more, yeah, about the actors and who's in it and the performances. And before I get into the more technical aspects for sure. I mean, don't even ask me about the score of a movie because I'm like, there was music, but
it, there was music and it manipulated me at some point.
and I went with it and I didn't notice.
Did you have any last thoughts on Father Goose you wanted to put out?
Well, just, for anyone that's listening and isn't sure if they want to watch it, I mean, you can find it for free online and it's cute.
You can also find a really great. I watched it off of the Criterion Channel, and
Oh
under
yeah.
the there's a section of movie called Cary Grant comedies that it's under, and it's got a great transfer on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cute, but I think it also has, like you said, there's comedy, and Peter Stone, I think, is a talented writer, and I think even the characters are really fun. And Leslie Caron's character is she's not a school teacher. They often gets called a school teacher as shorthand, but she's not actually. But I think her character is actually very strong, determined, impressive person who really holds her own.
I was confused by that. I thought she was a school teacher.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a confusing premise, but actually she's the daughter of a diplomat who sort of is in the role of a guardian to transport these kids who are
Oh, that's
children of
right.
diplomats
Okay.
to safety in Australia. And so she's in charge of their welfare and is trying to, uh, whatever, teach them good morals and such. But she's not
Don't
actually
be
a
around
school
men who
teacher.
have whiskey. Yeah.
So I think Leslie Caron's character is actually a pretty good female character for the era when sometimes they could be pretty thin. And and one thing I did like about having to watch this movie was it made me look up the director, Ralph Nelson, as well
Mm-hmm.
as Peter Stone, and just gave me a whole lot of movies that I want to check out now because Ralph Nelson um, directed some movies that are well known, like Requiem for a Heavyweight, Lilies of the Field, Charlie. But then there was also a lot of interesting sort of drama thrillers in his list with notable actors of the time, sort of like that second tier star who's like made a lot of movies in the 60s, but maybe you don't talk about right now. And it made me want to look up a lot of those movies. And then apparently, I didn't realize that Peter Stone is just one of my favorite writers.
Really?
Well, I just like a lot of things he's done, like Charade. He wrote a lot of Broadway musicals, actually, including
Really?
1776, which I really
Oh, you love 1776.
I do like it. I do like the movie, which he wrote the screenplay for as well.
Cary Grant was offered an early version of that. Did you know that?
Well, now you kind of can guess why, because it's Peter Stone. And he also wrote The Taking of Pelham 123, the movie.
You're kidding.
No.
Wow. The crazier thing about Peter Stone is his dad was I guess you call it scenarist for John Ford.
Oh, okay. So writing scenes for him.
I guess whenever they were still silent, or directing
Yeah.
silent, or what writer for it. Ralph Nelson, I did you come across his when I googled him, the most in-depth thing I could find on him was his LA Times obituary. Did you happen to read that?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't find a lot of information. I just kind of looked at his filmography.
his life is fascinating because he was he started out as an actor, but as a teenager, I, I'm butchering the information from his obituary, and I think a lot of this might be legend, myth making, but he was considered one of the biggest child delinquents in New York City, and was like
New York City.
an underage public enemy while he was also winning a New York Times oratory. And he wrote some plays that, including one of his first plays he wrote was like Kirk Douglas's big breakthrough.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then he went to the war, and then he went into TV and he directed TV. And it seems, and Lily's in the Field, the fascinating thing was they shot it. It was really low budget, and he shot it like in like 14 days. Like he was a quick shooter who would work with these actors. It's a lot like in the modern times when they have these Oscar bait directors who, for actors who want to like, you know, do an impression to win an Oscar, and you get someone who just will like direct a script. At one point on Father Goose, I don't think Nelson had a great time, but he had to write Cary Grant a letter telling him, "No, you're giving a great performance." And he flat out said that like his specialty was, the quote was, performance and not camera pyrotechnics.
Sure.
But performance is what he could do well. So I think there was some interesting stuff in his filmography that might be interesting checking out too.
Yeah, well, several people who were in his movies won Oscars, like
Yeah.
Sidney Poitier and Cliff Robertson, and yeah, so you can see why actors would want to work with him.
Do you have any last thoughts on Cary Grant?
He's a movie star. He's your prototypical movie star, and so I would encourage anyone to kind of go out there and find any of his movies from any of the eras, and just appreciate that he was actually also a great actor too. He wasn't playing himself, as was often said. And if you look at something like Father Goose, you can see that's not what he was like, but he sells the role. And yeah, I think he's definitely deserves respect for his acting, as well as that sort of movie star quality.
Do we want to end with like what is the biggest, most common Cary Grant quote? You know which one I'm talking about?
I don't know. What is it?
The one that he says, everyone wants to be Cary Grant, even I want to be Cary Grant.
Yeah.
Lani Gonzalez, thank you for being on the podcast, and thank you for talking with me about an actor for once.
Thanks, Shane. I'll come back anytime, talk about anybody you want.
I'll take you up on that.